Hello there, welcome to the SAROY channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well, and I hope you're going to go and get yourself a perfect drink, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. I also hope you're keeping yourself lovely and warm with that freezing cold weather. And don't forget to tell me whereabouts in the world you're from and what your favourite drink is, because I really do enjoy hearing from you. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my heart was pounding violently in my ears as panic infused my blood with its nauseous icy cocktail of terror on the rocks. I ran down the sweeping staircase of our semi-detached cottage-style double-storey home, finding to my absolute horror that the front door had been left wide open. How had that happened? I was certain I'd locked it after my husband had driven off. Merrill had been upstairs in the bedroom only a minute ago. Only a minute, but that is all it requires. A fleeting second of an intrusive distraction is all it takes for your worst nightmare to come to its consummate fruition. With the bright red front door left wide open, she could be anywhere by now. Supposing she'd gone out onto the street. I called out to my daughter, my heart strangled by fear, my chest tight with apprehension, my mind soaked in an infusion of trepidation. Merrill! Merrill! Merrill, where are you? I ran through all the downstairs rooms, calling out my 4-year-old daughter's name, but to no avail. There was no answer to my frantic, frenzied, desperate calls, only the sound of the inauspicious sound of silence, along with the purring sound of the kettle boiling. No, please, God, no, I cried. This can't be happening to me. It can't be happening to me. Panic-stricken, I ran out onto the street. It was early morning here in the smaller North American rural town where I lived. People were not yet up. The only reason I'd got up early was my husband needed to leave before the crack of dawn to catch a commuter train for an all-important meeting. I had bustled around our kitchen, making him coffee, along with a light snack to see him on his way. Merrill was a light sleeper. She'd got up to play with her Barbie dolls. That was what she'd been doing very happily only moments ago, before she had vanished off the face of the earth, in the upstairs bedroom. She had woken up early, sensing the unusual hive of activity, wanting to align herself with the bustle of it. She had subsequently spontaneously climbed out of bed in an ebullient, joyful mood. Mummy, Barbie's going to wear her pink coat this morning and her white skirt, 'cause just like Daddy, she's got a very important meeting that she needs to get to very soon. She has to hurry like Daddy does. That's very nice, dear, I had said, giving her a big kiss on her chubby little cheeks. She had looked up at me adoringly with her bright cornflower blue eyes, almost larger than her small, round, gorgeous baby face, with its cute little dimples around the cheeks, and a head caressed by a sea of buoyant blonde ringleted like curls. She'd been wearing her pink Donald Duck pyjamas, and had been seen assiduously preoccupied in dressing up her Barbie doll, talking to her. We need to hurry. We've got to get very quickly. We need to get away very quickly. We can't be late. As I ran out onto our street, it was dark, with the first flickers of morning light beckoning over the horizon. The street lights with their sensors were still on. It was not light enough for them to automatically switch themselves off as they normally did. For if indeed I had not been so caught up in my feverish, frenetic panic, I would almost certainly have admired how beautiful it was outside this early in the morning, as the first cheerful chirping sounds of the dawn chorus filtered through the trees. A soft, gentle breeze was blowing. Every plant in the vicinity was gently swaying in this wind. Ostensibly, I was heartily glad that our road was a quiet place. No one was up and about. Not a solitary soul in sight, not even a jogger, cyclist, or early morning dog walker. There was nothing. So surely our little Merrill was safe. She couldn't have got far on her tiny little legs. But then where was she? I'd find her in any moment. I knew I would. No, she can't have gone far. No, she can't have gone far, I kept telling myself. I glanced up and down the deep grey asphalt road. The verdant pavements lined with very large oak trees on either side of the street, that stood up majestically proud and tall, like ingenious, sharp-witted centaurians on guard duty, their green leafy boughs jiggling up and down. A cool easterly breeze blew against my face, nuzzling my cheeks gently, almost as if it was trying to reassure me that all would be well. But my anguished heart felt a gut-wrenching sense of foreboding, causing the internal muscles in my stomach to churn violently, clenching and tightening like fists opening and closing. How I wished I'd been privy to see what those oak trees might have seen moments before. The dewy fresh grass of the manicured lawns was wet as I ran up and down my street, in my slippers, pyjamas and dressing gown, looking at individual houses, front yards, and of course the road itself, in every conceivable angle that I could. She couldn't have got far. No, she couldn't have got far, I told myself repetitively, again and again, like a video recording on rewind. She couldn't have got far. No, she couldn't have got far. I could hear a truck driving down the road. I waved furiously to get its attention, but it drove away, seemingly obliviously ignorant to my internal turmoil and the despairing screams of my heart, pleading him to stop. Please, stop! Someone must have seen something, surely. But then who? There wasn't a solitary soul in sight. Then I remembered the lake. I took my daughter to the lake very often. Her little legs never struggled to get there. It wasn't far. Oh my God, the lake! My daughter loved that lake. It was her quintessential favourite spot in the entire world. We always went to visit the lake to feed the ducks. My mind was tormented by that hauntingly huge body of water, the ominous, treacherous dangers it embodied. While beautiful and serene, its murky depths held many a secret. For over the years there had been a scattering of fortuitous, out-of-the-blue, random drownings in this place, not all of them children. All I could do was run towards the lake, my heart thundering violently in my chest, my pulse racing, my forehead sweating so that the hazelnut bangs in front of my face were wet from the perspiration. But there were only 3 words drumming away on the musical keyboard of my mind. God, please, no! God, please, no! God, please, no! We were fortunately privileged and ever grateful to have a large park area at the end of our street, with pristinely manicured lawns, a large silvery lake, a plethora of fabulous precipitous hiking trails, and of course hundreds of tall vertical verdant trees that sprawled out into a resplendent wood grove, stretching back for many miles. It was an idyllic haven for an abundance of wildlife of so many different species. It wasn't uncommon to see deer congregating at the lake for a morning drink or late in the evenings. It was in this serendipitous moment in time I wished with all my heart that the geographic location of this lake was anywhere else in the world except here. I was out of breath as I reached the lake. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, dappling the sky in a kaleidoscope of fetching golds, tangerines and pinks, almost as if an artist's paintbrush had proficiently, adeptly blended these colours into the sky to create a dazzling effect. The placid silvery lake stood perfectly still, twinkling under the early morning infusion of rising ethereal light. The ripples of water seemed undisturbed, unruffled, unsullied. Something could look perfectly innocent on its surface, couldn't it? For it wouldn't take much for a little girl to be engulfed and swallowed by the water whole, without it betraying its insidious Machiavellian secret. There was a tiny path-sized bicycle trail of asphalt that framed the outer edges of the lake, used for walkers and cyclists alike, to access in a circular roundabout trip around the broad length of the lake. I could see a cyclist in the furthest distance on the path, but they were far too far away for me to get their attention. I felt desperate helplessness, completely consumed by my fear. There was a huge lump in the back of my throat as I skimmed the whole area of the lake, with my vigilant, heedful eyes, rather like a fish-eagle, leaving no nook or cranny unchecked. But wherever I looked, there was no sight or sound of my child. It was all-consuming and daunting, because quite literally my daughter could be anywhere, like a yo-yo on a string, bobbing up and down in a perfect sequence. That was how I ran, up and down, backwards and forwards, right and left, this way and that, like a headless, tormented chicken who had lost her bearings. and possibly her mind as well. I also didn't forget to examine the foliage that grew around the lake. The long rushes, the native sedges, the milkweed, the arrowheads, the cardinal flowers. Even they tormented me as they winked at me in the morning, their long thin foliage swaying evocatively, as if in their dense covering they might be concealing a heinous evil. It was as if they were whispering to me, "She could be here. She could be here." I began to cry out for my child, "Meryl! Meryl!" But my repressed words were subdued and lost, tangled by that foggy lump in the back of my throat that incited my words to sound more like a spluttering chaos of awkward, inaudible chokes. For I could barely speak. I was consumed by a numbing feeling. All of a sudden, as if by the wave of a magician's wand, it was as if a light had been switched on in the valley. In a twinkling of an eye, the world was a whole lot lighter, brighter, vivid, clearer, as everything became more visible, conspicuous, a whole lot less obscure, in the scintillating light of a brand new morning. In accordance with this unveiling of this new day, it was now honoured with a flurry of activity around the lake, which escalated significantly. A couple of young women clad in pink sweatshirts, complemented by black leggings and white sneakers, were walking briskly around the lake as I waved them down. This seemingly mad, frantic woman in her pyjamas, oscillating her arms frantically, was not a welcoming sight for these two women, hell-bent on getting some decent exercise, not being very responsive to a seemingly unhinged stranger in her nightrobe trying to get their attention. They frowned, but they did stop. "Excuse me, have you seen a little 4-year-old girl around here?" Both the women's faces visibly softened. For a moment they registered a hint of empathy and compassion. "Sorry," they said. "No, we haven't seen her. I do hope you find her. Good luck." They proceeded along their way, increasing their pace, glancing back briefly over their shoulders to watch me. I began to run towards a man. He was walking his 2 spaniels around the lake. I waved him down. He stopped immediately, a concerned solicitude growing across his face. At least he didn't think I'd stepped out of the nut house, I thought. "Are you all right, madam?" "No, I'm not," I said, the tears cascading down my face. "I've lost my 4-year-old kid. I live up the road. I must have left the front door wide open after my husband left for work this morning. My 4-year-old has gone missing. She must have got out. I don't know what happened. I never leave that door open. I don't know where she's got to." "Have you called the police?" asked the man, taking his cell phone out of the back pocket of his khaki pants. I shook my head vigorously. "But surely I don't need to call the police yet. My daughter's got to be around here somewhere." The man ignored me as he punched 911 in his cell phone. "The name's Sean Barrow. A 4-year-old girl has gone missing. We don't know where she's got to. Unfortunately, the front door was accidentally left open. The kid got out, that's right. Her mother's frantically worried. She might have walked up to the lake." "Yes, thank you." He then proceeded to give the lady at the end of the phone all my details, which I repeated to him. "Look," he said, "let me take you back home, make you a hot cup of tea. How long have you been looking for your child?" "All morning," I sighed wearily. "I've been back home hundreds of times. I've looked up and down this street over and over again. I've been all around the lake. I can find no sight or sound of her anywhere. I've looked in every nook and cranny. Supposing someone took her," I gasped, cupping my hands over my mouth. "Don't go there. It doesn't help at all," said the man kindly. "Look, let me take you home. I'll go back to my place to drop off my 2 spaniels. Then you go and put some clothes on. I'll come back to your place, make you a nice hot cup of tea, and I'll wait with you for the police to arrive." When I got home, I threw on some leggings, a sweatshirt and sneakers, and before I knew it, Sean was bustling around my kitchen making me tea, while I was trying in vain to get hold of my husband, but his cell phone was off. I felt heartily annoyed. Why, when I needed him the most, was his cell phone off? In truth, my husband tended to put his cell phone off throughout the day. He didn't appreciate being disturbed while he was working. He hated being dictated to by this little fine piece of technology that so many of us are addicted to. I was almost certain that during this quintessential important meeting he was attending, that his cell phone would be left off all day. "Don't you need to be somewhere?" I asked Sean, whom I'd seen around our neighbourhood on a plethora of occasions, but did not know him personally.
"Don't you worry about me. I would very much like to help if I may. I'd like to do everything I can to help you get your child home safe and well."
"Thank you. I appreciate it so much," I said, grabbing the mug he made for me, holding it thankfully in my hands, thoroughly enjoying the warmth of it, and the measure of solace that it somehow brought me. It wasn't long before 2 police officers were in my home. The day seemed to whirl by so fast, by which time Sean had gone around our entire neighbourhood knocking on people's doors. He'd posted up pictures of my daughter, which he had attached to various trees down our road. In my book, he was even more efficient than some of the police officers. I was so glad I had inadvertently run into him. He was not only expediently helpful, but a source of invaluable encouragement and benevolent comfort to me. The officers introduced themselves to me as Officer Lisa Barker and Officer Andrew Myers. Andrew looked young for an officer, but I was struck by how attentive he was to every detail I gave him. He really rather reminded me of an owl, with his wide, learned, razor-sharp, astute eyes studying me behind his round lenses.
"Now I know, Miss Clayton."
"The name's Georgina," I told him. "I would prefer it if you'd call me Georgie."
"Georgie, I know this is very distressing, very discomposing for you. Obviously it is," he said, looking at me empathetically. "I want to assure you that 95% of kids that go missing are always found safe and well. I'm quite sure we will find your child. I've got a couple of officers on the beat knocking on doors to ask your neighbours questions and to check their backyards in case your kid wandered off. We had a time when a kid went missing. She was found in the neighbour's yard, playing on their swing set and their seesaw. Quite frankly, she could be anywhere in the neighbourhood. Now, I've got an officer right now searching the lake area as we speak. I need you to be very calm, Georgie, for the sake of your little girl. I need you to clear your mind thoroughly. Tell me everything that happened from the moment you got up this morning." The officer took his pen and paper out of his pocket. The 2 officers were now studying me, like 2 curious ravens, perching on a wicker fence, percipiently attentive and focused on my every word, as if something I might say could bring forth a fruitful conclusion to this rather perplexing conundrum of my daughter's disappearance. Well, my husband's alarm clock went off at about 4:30. He had to get up rather early. He needed to catch a commuter train. There is an all-day meeting with the company about deciding whether we should branch out into the European market or not, as there's lots of scepticism among some of the CEOs whether this would be a good move. I've been trying to get through to him on his cell, but he's not answering the phone. You see, he switches his cell phone off in important meetings. He's away for a few nights, but he always gets in touch with me. The officer nodded. "Do you know the hotel where he's staying?"
"I'm sorry, I don't. I can't remember. But he will call me later. I'll find out the details later for you then."
"Did you see your husband leave the house this morning?"
"Of course I did. Me and Merrill waved him off. I'm certain I closed the door behind me after he'd left. That's why none of this makes any sense at all to me. You see, Merrill would never have got out of the door if it had been closed, and I'd close it automatically all the time."
"You are sure you closed it? Do you remember hearing the click in the lock?"
"I think so, but I'm not sure anymore. I'm beginning to doubt and second-guess myself. But in truth, it's so instinctive, isn't it, for me to close the door behind me every time?"
"Well, go on with your story, from when you woke up very early this morning."
"Well, I got up to make my husband coffee. You see, he needs that caffeine boost to get him going. I wanted to make him a light snack as well, but he decided a donut was all he needed in the end. I don't really like him eating donuts first thing in the morning, but my husband has a dreadful sweet tooth. He can't help himself."
"Where was your daughter at this time?"
"She was upstairs. She was waddling around in her Donald Duck pyjamas, playing with her Barbie doll."
"Have you got a picture of your daughter for me?" the officer asked me.
"Of course," I said, quickly pulling out my cell phone from my sweatshirt pocket and scrolling through the photographs, picking up a close picture of my daughter feeding the ducks at the lake and smiling up at me happily through the camera. "Here," I said. The officer took a photograph of my kid with his own cell phone, sending copies to everyone on the search for my child, while one officer came to the door asking me for an item of clothing so that the tracker dogs whom had arrived at the lake would be able to see if they could discern a scent trail.
I remember the horror of that piteous, poignant moment as I handed the officer an item of my precious daughter's clothing from the laundry basket. It was a yellow dress embroidered with white flowers on it that my daughter had worn the previous day. Please God, may they not find her trail by that lake, my heart begged inwardly.
Now where were we? Said the officer again, stroking his chin reflectively. Now you said your daughter was playing with her Barbie doll this morning.
That's right, she was. She said she would need it to dress the Barbie, as the Barbie, like Daddy, needed to get to a very important meeting in a hurry. The two officers looked at each other, as if engaging in a momentary illumination of sorts.
Do you think your little girl would act out her intentions as little children often do? Walk off to the pretend so-called Barbie meeting?
You mean if she found the front door open, would she walk out?
The officer nodded. That's exactly what I mean.
Absolutely. My daughter's always wandering off. I think with the door being left wide open, she'd possibly have thought about going to the lake to feed the ducks. She'd probably have grabbed a loaf of bread, been on her merry way, without a bye or leave. She's very impulsive, an active child, forever busying herself in her fantasy make-believe world.
Well, we're thoroughly searching the lake area even as I speaks, so Georgie, I can assure you of that our tracker dogs will know if your daughter's been around that lake, if they pick up her scent. Do you know, Georgie, if anyone else has a key for your front door? Could anyone else have possibly opened it this morning?
No, not that I know of, with the exception of my husband, of course, but by then he'd already left. I don't know why it was left open. As I keep telling you, I'm certain I closed it after my husband left the house.
Is there anyone you know of personally who's shown a particular interest in your child of late?
What are you suggesting? You don't think someone has abducted her? Please don't say that. Don't scare me.
Look, Georgie, I'm going through the standard police protocol, asking you all the questions I need to ask, covering all the avenues. Right now, we don't know where your daughter is. There's no need to be alarmed. We need to be open to all possibilities.
Well, my husband's father did say that Meryl was a particularly pretty child, that I must take particular care of her. Watch that she didn't get abducted. He told me that you hear dreadful stories about children going missing all the time. I certainly regretted mentioning this, as my father-in-law's innocent comments had aroused a great deal of interest among the officers. It opened a can of worms, so to speak. It would seem unintentionally I had dragged the poor man into the investigation. For all intensive purposes, he was interrogated. Both my in-laws were phoning me frantically, asking me what had happened to their granddaughter. Should they fly out to stay with me? But I had reassured them that that would not be necessary. By all accounts, they were terribly upset, especially considering that they couldn't contact their son to ask him what was going on. Why does he always have to have his cell phone off? My mother-in-law complained. He's always switching that bloody thing off. Fast forward to the end of a long, hard, grueling day. A day I wish to never repeat, that would ultimately leave an indelible footprint in my mind, never to be forgotten. For it was a stressful, chaotic day, not easily forgotten. A day in which no fruitful outcome had been realized. My daughter was still missing. She could be anywhere. She could be terrified. A mother's worst nightmare, my nightmare, had come to its fruition. A day engulfed in a tsunami of dread, where one's life comes crashing down before you, like the thunderous mighty waves of a tempestuous sea, engulfing and consuming everything in its wake, with not a care in the world for the trail of shattered, devastated lives it leaves behind. A heart-wrenching day that tore at my heartstrings, robbing, pilfering and plundering my most precious love, my beloved daughter. A day when a tenebrous darkness descended over my mind, like a cloying, suffocating fog, through which I could not see any light, for the light had been drained away, like the water being plundered down a sinkhole, gone forever, to be seen no more. My thoughts had drifted away into the ether, congesting into the black thunderclouds, brewing over the horizon, choking from a turbulent, oppressive heaviness, a mother's despair. They longed to unleash and offload. In truth, my tears I did struggle to contain, but somehow against all the odds, I couldn't afford to allow my helplessness to hijack my sanity, not when my daughter desperately needed me to hold it together, but my strength was surely waning. My internal organs were not unaffected by this gruesome ordeal, for indeed the digestive system of mine had gone awry. My knotted stomach was pulverized by anxiety. It was churning away like a washing machine on full throttle. I was plagued with a relentless guilt, an inflammatory self-reproach. I began blaming myself for my daughter's disappearance. If I had made absolutely certain the door was properly closed, then my daughter would not have got away. I knew the outlook could be potentially bleak, irrespective of the positive spin the police put on everything. My daughter had not been found. Neighbours' backyards had been tirelessly searched. No stone had been left unturned. No one had seen sight or sound of a 4-year-old girl. Where had she gone? The worst news was the tracker dogs had caught on to my daughter's trail, which went directly from my home to the edge of the lake, right down to where the water was. Then the trail had mysteriously vanished and ended, although one of the dogs had kept running up and down the trail that led to a woodgrove, sniffing the air as if he could smell her scent on the wind. The tracker had said the dog's behaviour was unusually bizarre. He'd never seen that behaviour before. The very congenial officer called Andrew came back to brief me, but tried to maintain a stoic, impassive expression on his face. But I was very good at discerning body language. I perceived that he ascertained, based on the dog's behaviour around the lake, that my daughter had possibly drowned, although the dogs, who usually could smell a dead body, had not tracked the scent of death. They picked up her smell in and around the water, and that was all. More unsettling, however, was that my daughter's Barbie was found floating upside down in some of the reeds, a revelation that left the hairs on the back of my neck standing on edge. Professedly, they were going to get police divers to scan the lake in the morning, and right now I was too benumbed to allow myself to think beyond the static point in the investigation, for if I dare meditate on this any more, I would almost certainly not be able to hold it together. I was barely making it already. I was crumbling at the knees like a dilapidated building, beginning to fall apart with perfunctory slipshod foundations that were more than a little hit and miss, I'm sorry to say. The worst part of it all was no one, not even the police, had been able to get in contact with my elusive husband. Where was he? I'd got a brief SMS saying, "Love you, sweetheart. Utterly exhausted. Can't speak. Hectic day. Phone you in the morning." I didn't even have my husband's shoulders to cry on. I was all alone. That lovely, kind man, Sean, who had helped me so diligently during the course of the day, along with his charming wife, Patricia, had gone beyond the call of duty. They had generously offered to stay over at my house to keep me company, fearing that my being alone on my own would not serve my best interests favourably. I didn't agree. I wanted to be on my own. People would crowd me. I definitely needed my space. Patricia had made me a casserole that remained in its pot cold in the fridge, untouched and unconsumed. How could I possibly eat a single thing while in a state of perpetual conjecture and ambivalent incertitude, where answers to all my irresolute questions were as unforthcoming and evasive as a red fox? I knew a glass of white wine could steady my already jittering nerves. That was the only thing that could work for me. I poured myself a large glass and glugged it down, soaking in the flavours of the sweet, fragrant bouquet, allowing it to soothe my troubled soul. It appeared to be working, like a mollifying anaesthetic, as the tranquilizing effects of the alcohol ran through my veins, calming my turbulent mind, so that the feisty waves of my hopeless despair were now pacified. I was already feeling steadier on my feet, clearer in my mind. Then I heard a knocking sound at the door. At first it was so light you could believe you had imagined it, but then I heard it again. To my surprise, I opened the door to a young girl standing in the doorway. She looked strangely familiar. I'd definitely seen her around here before. "Let me in," she whispered. "It's very important." The girl walked into my entrance hall furtively. She looked around as if she was worried that I might have company with me. She asked me, "Is there anyone else here with you?" "No," I said. Relief flooded over her face. She glanced briefly at my glass of wine, with a look of longing on her face. "I wouldn't mind one of those," she asked me. I didn't care, even if she was underage. These were exceptional circumstances, after all. I poured the girl a large glass of wine, which she took gratefully from me. She made her way to my large leather couch. Like a typical teenager, she sank into it comfortably, while she pulled her legs up to her chest and rested her torso against the high rise of the couch. She began to sip the wine reflectively for a while, saying nothing, and then she surveyed me through her brown eyes. At a guess I would say she was about 15 or 16 years old, but I couldn't be sure. She was quite pretty, with long black hair that framed a perfectly symmetrical face, bright green eyes, long lashes, and a small oval chin. "I sneaked out of the house," she told me in a whisper. "I make a habit of doing so. The parents," she said, rolling her eyes in the back of her head. "Draconian. That's the best way to describe them, I'm afraid. My dad's terribly strict. If he knew I was here, let's just say he'd have a baby." At that expression she laughed lightly, as if the idea of her dad giving birth tickled her fancy. She looked at me nervously. "I did see all your posters around town, you know. I know exactly what happened to your daughter." I gasped. "You do? You do?" She nodded. "I've got something to tell you, but I'm worried you won't believe me." Is it bad?" I asked her. "Please don't tell me it's bad." No, it's not bad. It's just, well, rather peculiar." "Go on," I said. "Right now I don't care how incongruous your story sounds. All I care about is finding my daughter. That's all that matters, after all." "Well, I sneaked out of the house early this morning for some exercise. I tend to get up very early, so no one will see me. My dad's neurotic, you see. Worries about absolutely everything. Always thinks some pervert is going to abduct me. Of course, with your daughter's posters around town, this evening he was even more pedantic. He said to me, 'Didn't I tell you? They're horrible people in this world, doing terrible things to children.'" I grimaced when the girl said that. The young girl sighed with exasperation, rolling her eyes in the back of her head, as if her dad was the bane of her life or a very annoying bugging mosquito that she would seriously like to swat. "Parents," she said, on a lighter note. "Who would have them, I ask you?" Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. I was running around the lake when I saw something in the distance. At first I couldn't discern it. It did get my attention. It was like a small moving blob of white. I remember stopping and thinking that I wasn't sure what it was, but I thought it could be a little girl. I always run with my baby binoculars. I'm a very keen bird watcher, you see. If you run down some of those woodland trails, you can spot some beauties. I've actually caught sight of some rather rare birds on my runs. I focused on your daughter, realizing that it was indeed a little girl. She was all alone, without any adult supervision, and I was rather worried about her. You see, it was relatively dark outside. She appeared to be trying to reach for something in the water. Then she lost her balance and tumbled into the water. Then she seemed to sink like a stone. "My God," I gasped. "You mean she fell into the water?" The girl nodded. So naturally I increased my running pace. I needed to get to her. But I was still a way away. Something was there long before me. It was huge, big, black. It looked like a blob at first, of something really massive. But as I got closer, I discerned it was a Bigfoot. "A Bigfoot? Are you absolutely sure about this?" I asked her. "Oh, absolutely. There is no doubt. It was a Bigfoot." "Oh, my God!" The young girl looked at me. This is the part where my story gets, well, really rather strange. Go on. "Well, the Bigfoot was terribly concerned about your poor daughter. Your daughter was howling. Her clothes and hair were sopping wet. The Bigfoot was bobbing her up and down on her, on her hips, I guess, and your daughter began to calm down significantly. She even began to twiddle the Bigfoot's hair in her hands. The Bigfoot looked directly at me. She lifted up your daughter towards me to show me, to give me a good look of her." "The Bigfoot looked at you? Showed you my daughter?" The girl nodded. "Then she spoke to me in my mind. I know it sounds crazy, but she really, really did." "She spoke to you in your mind?" I repeated. The girl nodded. "Yes, I know it sounds very absurd, but it really did happen. They weren't my thoughts. They were very different, like very distinct words that definitely weren't mine. The Bigfoot said to me in my mind, 'Find me the mother. Tell her to come to the lake tonight when it's dark. I'll give her her child back. Tell her she's in good hands, not to worry. Tell her she must come to the lake on her own, or I will never bring her child back.'" I stared at the young girl incredulously, confounded by disbelief. Was she drunk? Was she winding me up? Was this some kind of macabre, cruel, twisted joke? Because if it was, I wasn't laughing. But the young girl eyeballed me unflinchingly, through her green eyes with a sober sincerity, and an earnest honesty that I could not dismiss out of hand. "You're not making this up?" The girl laughed. "Are you kidding? I've got absolutely no imagination whatsoever. My English teacher at school keeps telling me that over and over again. She complains tirelessly that my stories are pedestrian. What does she say? Pedestrian and dull. I couldn't make up an inventive, ingenious, fabricated story if I like, she keeps telling me. For a start, I never even knew Bigfoot was real. Secondly, I no doubt what I saw. Thirdly, I unequivocally know the creature spoke to me. Well, what can I say? She was female, she had big pillowy breasts, dark flowing hair with a bit of red in it. She was very nice, her eyes were kind. I think your kid is safe with her. I really do." "You do think so? You think my daughter is safe?" "I do, absolutely. That Bigfoot saved your daughter's life. She would have drowned if that Bigfoot hadn't rescued her. In truth, I must confess I'm not sure I'd have been able to save her myself. I can't swim, you see. I'm rather afraid of the water. If it wasn't for that Bigfoot, your daughter would be dead, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, but she's not. I would come with you. To the lake, I mean, but the creature insisted you went alone. I do have to ask you this. I don't want you to tell anybody about me visiting you here, or what I told you I saw. Don't involve the police or anything. Just for the record, if you do start blubbing to anyone, I will plead ignorance. Pretend I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I can't let people think I believe in Bigfoot. People will make nasty comments about me on social media. I couldn't hack that." "Don't you worry. I won't involve you in any of this," I assured the girl. "Thank you so much for coming. I truly appreciate it." "It's only a pleasure. I just hope the Bigfoot brings you back your child. She seemed honourable. Good luck." After the young girl had gone, I waited for it to get a little later. It felt like every second lasted a lifetime. I was now clinging to a hope, as if I was hanging on for dear life, a slippery cliff face, from which I would surely plummet to meet a grim outcome, if this wasn't true. I wanted to believe with all my heart that my little daughter was in the safe hands of an ambiguous Bigfoot. Or was my strange visitor making this unlikely story all up? I was torn between a rock and a hard place. I was desirous to believe with all my heart that this story was intrinsically true, for indeed if it was not, then my hopes were surely dashed. Finally, when the clock on my oakwood mantel above the fireplace in our lounge struck 12, I got into my truck, driving to the parking bay at the lake, which was down the road from us. The road was deathly quiet, without a solitary soul in sight. I parked quickly, climbing out of my truck, closing the door behind me. I began to trudge around the lake with my flashlight, my heart suspended in my chest like an anticipatory balloon tangled up in a tree, clawing on to the desperate hope that it would be set free to soar in the sky once again. It was an exquisitely beautiful night, smelling fragrantly fresh. I could smell wild flowers on the wind that I could not identify, with a minty lemongrass bouquet. It was dark, but the wafer-thin silvery shafts of moonlight spiraled through the velvety sky, offering a scant light which was heightened only slightly by the sparkling display of the twinkling stars. There was a still wind blowing, while the tall silhouettes of the ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees, with their tight boughs of needles, seemed to jiggle more loosely in the wind, like stiff-necked strangers at a party, being encouraged to dance. The lake looked magnificent on this auspicious night. It sparkled and gleamed, its silvery shimmering surface caressed by the moon, as the sounds of crickets and frogs serenaded the night, offering me a measure of reassurance in their songs. In the distance I heard owl hoots, one after another, as if they were communicating with each other, and occasional shrill high-frequency whistles. They were all over, everywhere. All these years later I affirmatively believe that it was an all-clear sound being made by a team of anomalous Bigfoots, all signalling to each other that I had indeed come alone without reinforcements. I could sense eyes on me absolutely everywhere. I discerned red eye shine all over the area as dozens of blazing pairs of eyes, all about 7 to 8 feet off the ground, were fixed on me like superglue. I knew I was being studied, scrutinized, and thoroughly observed. I could feel as if the eyes were searing through me, through my very soul. Then I saw her, moving with such an elegant grace, gliding on her huge legs towards me, almost as if she was skating on ice. On her shoulders she was carrying my daughter, who was giggling with delight, as if she was having a whale of a time, on a Ferris wheel, a roundabout, or a donkey at the fair. My daughter's tiny legs were dangling on either side of the Bigfoot's head, while the Bigfoot's overlong arms were holding my daughter's legs down upon her chest. My daughter was tugging the creature's hair like the mane of a horse. I gasped in astonishment. I realized that this creature was indeed a Bigfoot. Laugh if you like when I say she was beautiful, but she really was. Not in the conventional human way of beauty that has to meet certain ridiculous criteria in order to qualify. No, she was uniquely beautiful, in her own individualistic way, arousing in me the kind of awe and reverent admiration that I would have for a tiger or a lion. Indeed, she was magnificent. She stood up tall, proud, lofty, majestic, like a substantial tree, covered in long dark hair, with a pyramid-shaped head that was slung low upon her shoulders. She had overlong arms, a very handsome face that was so unquestionably human, bearing a remarkable resemblance to the indigenous Cherokee people. She had deep-set, dark-hooded eyes. Her eyes were so kind and beautiful. She had high cheekbones and a flat nose. I stood there in awe with the gratitude soaring in my heart, like the wings of a dove. I gasped for joy on seeing my daughter again. The Bigfoot female bent down to let my daughter get off her shoulders, but my daughter wanted to stay there. "I want another ride! I want another ride!" she cried indignantly. "I want another ride!" I impulsively grabbed my daughter off the Bigfoot's shoulders, cradling her in my arms, feeling a rapturous thrill descend down my spine. I could smell her familiar scent. Needless to say, my daughter failed to share the same enthusiasm in seeing me again as I did in seeing her. All she could think about was another ride. The Bigfoot's eyes met mine. We were like two mothers united in our understanding of a mother's love. She said to me in my mind, "She's safe now. I know what it's like to lose a child." "Thank you," I said. "Thank you." The Bigfoot nodded at me, her eyes twinkling brightly. She looked happy to see me reunited with my daughter. My daughter was crying with deep regret. She certainly didn't want the Bigfoot to leave. I was astonished with her obvious attachment to the creature. I stood there watching the Bigfoot as she glided into the heart of the woods. It all seemed so surreal. I noticed one by one the red eye shine that had been fixed on me from different sets of eyes among the tall trees disappeared until they were all gone. I heard a series of owl hoots. Then all became still and serene, as if the night had never been interrupted by the presence of such incredulous, curious creatures. I was left alone, cradling my daughter by the lake, and as if on cue to celebrate our joyful reunion, the crickets and frogs that had taken a brief respite from their nightly songs started to serenade the night again. To cut a long story short, when my daughter returned home, she was right as rain. All I could get out of her was that the bear lady and her children were terribly nice. They played lots of games together and ate sweet berries. The bear pulled her out of the water after she fell into the lake to rescue her Barbie. Of course the police interviewed my daughter, but they were also told about the nice bears, so didn't quite comprehend what had happened to my daughter. I was not about to reveal the true story to them. As for my husband, I decided not to inform him about my daughter's disappearance until after he returned home. Ironically, he phoned me the very next morning, bright and early, to ask me if all was well. I told him things could not be better. I was to learn later that my husband had left his coat on the hook in the hall and quickly returned to retrieve it. He believes he possibly had not closed the door behind him. So my husband was the one who was responsible for all this drama. To this very day, I am very good friends with Sean and his wife Patricia, who offered me so much help during my search for my daughter. The girl who told me about the Bigfoot is called Tonya. We are both very good friends to this very day. To date, we have both kept our Bigfoot story secret, until now in this anonymous forum, where it is a privilege to share our story with you and your listeners. But as you can appreciate, I would like very much to leave time, places and dates off the radar. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, thank you very much for that fabulous story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.